Ambassador Velith's hands shook as he walked into the United Nations building in New York. The tall, thin alien had never been to Earth before, and everything about this planet made him nervous. The sounds, the smells, even the way humans moved. It all felt dangerous to him. Velith belonged to a peaceful race called Alterians. His people had spent thousands of years avoiding war, choosing instead to talk through problems and find peaceful solutions. They believed that violence was never the answer. But now, for the first time in their history, they needed help from warriors. The meeting room was filled with Earth's most important military leaders. General Hannah Kim sat at the head of the table, her dark eyes studying the alien visitor carefully. Next to her, Admiral Jiho Park reviewed thick folders filled with battle reports and casualty numbers. Both were experienced Korean military officers who had seen their share of conflicts. "Please sit down," General Kim said, gesturing to an empty chair. Her voice was polite but firm. Velith sat down awkwardly. His long limbs didn't fit well in the human-sized chair. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "Honored leaders of Earth, I come to you in our darkest hour. My people, the Alterians, have always been peaceful. We have never raised weapons against anyone. We solve our problems through talking and understanding." He paused, his voice getting quieter. "But now we face an enemy that doesn't want to talk." Admiral Park leaned forward. "Tell us about this enemy." "They call themselves the Krelian Empire," Velith said, and his voice trembled with fear. "They are nothing like us. They live for war. They destroy everything in their path. In just 2 months, they have conquered 17 different worlds. Billions of innocent people are now their slaves or dead." General Kim's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "How many ships do they have?" "We estimate around 3,000 war vessels," Velith replied. "Our own fleet consists mainly of exploration ships and medical vessels. We were never meant to fight. When we tried to defend ourselves, they destroyed our ships easily. It was like watching children try to fight trained soldiers." The room fell silent. The human military leaders exchanged glances, communicating without words in the way that experienced soldiers do. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "Admiral," Park asked. Velith straightened up in his chair. "We know about your species' history. We know that humans have fought many wars throughout your development. You understand combat in ways that we never could. We're asking for your help." "Our help," General Kim repeated. "Yes," Velith said quickly. "We can offer you advanced technology in return. Our medical equipment can heal wounds that would be fatal to humans. Our energy systems are far more efficient than yours. Our faster-than-light travel could revolutionize your space program." He pulled out a small device from his robes. "This communicator can instantly connect you to anyone in the galaxy. And this," he produced another device, "can scan and cure most diseases in minutes." The humans looked at the alien technology with interest, but their expressions remained serious. "We don't need much," Velith continued desperately. "Perhaps a few of your warships and some military advisors. Maybe some of your tactical knowledge. Surely that would be enough to—" "A few ships," General Kim interrupted. She stood up slowly, and suddenly the room felt much colder. Velith looked confused. "Well, yes, I understand that would be a significant contribution for your people, but—" "Ambassador," Admiral Park said, his voice deadly calm, "I don't think you understand what you're asking for." I don't understand," Velith stammered. General Kim walked to the large window that looked out over the city. Below, millions of humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. "You're not asking us to send a few ships," she said without turning around. "You're asking us to go to war. And when humans go to war, we don't do it halfway." "But surely," Velith began. "No," Admiral Park cut him off. "You don't understand. When we fight with everything we have. Every ship, every soldier, every resource. We don't just send help, we become your war machine." Velith felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the way these humans spoke made him realize he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought he was asking for help from a slightly more aggressive species. Instead, he had just awakened something that had been sleeping. "General," Kim turned back to face him. "We'll help you, Ambassador. But understand this, once we say yes, there's no going back. The Krelians won't just face the Galactic Council anymore. They'll face humanity at war. Within 6 hours, every government on Earth had voted. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would mobilize for total war. As Velith left the building that day, he wondered if he had just saved his people or doomed the entire galaxy. Captain Minho Lee stood on the bridge of the orbital command station, watching something that had never happened before in human history. In just 3 weeks, Earth had completely changed. What used to be a peaceful planet focused on exploration and trade had become the center of the largest military operation humanity had ever seen. Through the massive viewing windows, Minho could see hundreds of ships floating in space around Earth. But these weren't the same ships that had been there a month ago. Cargo vessels that once carried food and supplies between planets were now being fitted with weapons. Passenger ships that used to take families on vacation trips were being turned into troop carriers. Even old mining ships were being converted into something the galaxy had never seen before. "Sir, the Harmony Dawn is ready for inspection," his assistant reported. Minho looked at what used to be a luxury cruise ship. Now it bristled with missile launchers and energy cannons. The ship's beautiful observation decks had been replaced with armor plating, thick enough to stop anything the Krillians could throw at it. Down in the research labs, Dr. Sora Jang was working with technology that the Alterians had given them as payment. But she wasn't using it the way the aliens had intended. The peaceful shield generators were being modified into something much darker. "The psychological warfare system is ready for testing," she announced to her team. Her lab was filled with brilliant scientists who had spent their careers studying alien technology. Now they were using that knowledge to create weapons. "How does it work?" asked her assistant, looking nervously at the strange device on the lab table. "Simple," Dr. Jang explained. "When enemy ships are destroyed, this device will record the final moments, the sounds, the communications, everything. Then it broadcasts those recordings on all frequencies to the remaining enemy ships. They'll hear their friends dying over and over again." The assistant looked pale. "Isn't that a bit cruel?" Dr. Jang's expression hardened. "The Krillians have enslaved entire worlds. They've killed billions of innocent people. If hearing the screams of their dying comrades makes them think twice about attacking innocent civilians, then I consider it a mercy." Meanwhile, in the training facilities, human soldiers were learning new ways to fight in space. Counselor Nexus, an Alterian observer, watched in horror as they practiced boarding enemy ships. The humans moved like predators, using tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. "They're planning to actually board enemy vessels during combat," Nexus whispered to his colleague. "That's impossible. No one survives boarding actions in space warfare." But the humans didn't seem to care about survival rates. They practiced the same deadly maneuvers over and over again, perfecting techniques that would let them take control of enemy ships from the inside. They studied blueprints of Krillian vessels, learning the best places to plant explosives and the fastest routes to critical systems. Colonel Dae Kim supervised the training. He was a quiet man who had spent 20 years in Earth's military. When Nexus approached him with concerns about the dangerous tactics, the colonel didn't even look up from his tactical display. "This seems excessive," Nexus said, watching soldiers practice with weapons that were designed to cut through ship hulls. "Surely there are less dangerous ways to fight. Excessive would be letting them reach Earth," Colonel Kim replied calmly. "This is just being thorough." The alien couldn't understand how humans could talk about such violence so casually. They discussed battle plans the same way his people talked about gardening or art. It was as if war was just another job that needed to be done properly. In factories around the world, millions of humans were working around the clock to build weapons. Assembly lines that once produced cars were now making missiles. Electronics factories were creating guidance systems for weapons that could track targets across entire solar systems. Even clothing factories were producing military uniforms and protective gear. President Ari Cho addressed the entire world on television. She stood behind a podium in the presidential palace, looking directly into the camera with calm, determined eyes. "My fellow humans," she began, "we stand at a crossroads in history. For the first time, we're not fighting for territory or resources. We're not fighting because of old grudges or political differences. We're fighting for something much more important." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We fight for every Peaceful world that can't defend itself. We fight for children on distant planets who deserve to grow up free. We fight so that civilizations like the Alterians can continue to exist without fear. We go to war so that others may know peace. The speech was broadcast not just on Earth, but across the galaxy. Alien species watched in amazement as an entire planet united for war. There were no protests, no political arguments, no debates about whether this was the right thing to do. Humanity had decided to fight, and that was the end of the discussion. Back on the orbital station, Captain Lee received reports from across the solar system. Mars was producing ammunition at unprecedented rates. The asteroid belt had become a massive shipyard where new warships were being built faster than anyone thought possible. Jupiter's moons were now military bases, where soldiers trained for combat in different types of environments. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a message from the Krillian Empire. They're demanding that we stay out of their war." Captain Lee smiled grimly. "Send them our response. We're not staying out of your war. Your war is now ours." The machine of human warfare had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The alarm bells rang across Kepler Station at exactly 0600 hours. Commander Hyun Yu stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Soul's Pride, watching as 60 Krillian warships approached the peaceful mining station. The station housed 3,000 civilian workers and their families, people who had never seen combat and never expected to. "Sir, the Krillians are demanding surrender," his communications officer reported. "They're giving the civilians 10 minutes to evacuate before they start shooting." Commander Yu looked at his tactical display. The human fleet had only 25 ships, and most of them were smaller than the massive Krillian battleships. Any normal military commander would have retreated or tried to negotiate, but Yu wasn't thinking like a normal commander. "Tell the station to keep their people inside," he ordered. "We're going to end this quickly." His officers exchanged glances. Lieutenant Seo Jin, his second-in-command, stepped closer. "Sir, we're outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Their ships are bigger and more heavily armed." "Their ships are also predictable," Yu replied calmly. "They fight like every other military in the galaxy. Line up, exchange fire until someone gives up. They've never faced humans before." The Krillian fleet moved into standard battle formation, just as Yu had expected. Their largest ships formed a wall of firepower, while smaller vessels moved to flank the human force. It was textbook space warfare, the kind that had worked for them against every other species they'd conquered, but humans didn't read the same textbooks. "Launch the wolves," Commander Yu ordered. 12 small fast ships broke away from the human formation. These weren't normal warships. They were converted cargo haulers packed with explosives and piloted by volunteers. The Krillians watched, in confusion, as these tiny vessels accelerated directly toward their battle line. "What are they doing?" demanded General Krax, the Krillian fleet commander. "Those ships are too small to damage us." He was about to learn how wrong he was. The first wolf ship slammed into a Krillian cruiser at nearly light speed. The explosion was visible from 50,000 kilometers away. The cruiser simply disappeared, along with its entire crew of 800 warriors. Before the Krillians could react, 3 more wolf ships found their targets. "They're using suicide attacks," screamed a Krillian captain over the communication channels. "They're destroying themselves to destroy us." But that was just the beginning. While the Krillians were focused on the suicide ships, the main human fleet attacked using tactics that no civilized species had ever seen before. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships cleanly, human weapons targeted life support systems, engines, and communication arrays. They wanted to disable ships, not just destroy them. Captain Unamoon commanded one of the human destroyers, the Busan Thunder. Her ship was smaller and weaker than the Krillian vessels, but it was also faster and more maneuverable. She used that advantage to get close to enemy ships, closer than any sane captain would risk. "Captain, we're taking heavy damage," her weapons officer reported. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 7. "Keep us moving," Moon ordered. "Get us alongside that battleship." Her ship scraped against the hull of a massive Krillian warship, so close that the 2 vessels were almost touching. At that range, the enemy's big guns couldn't target them, but the human ship could use its cutting lasers to slice through the battleship's armor. "Boarding parties, go!" Moon shouted. Human Marines in protective suits launched themselves from the destroyer directly onto the enemy ship's hull. They carried cutting tools and explosives, ready to fight their way inside. The Krillians had never seen anything like it. Who was crazy enough to board an enemy ship during combat? The answer was humans. Inside the Krillian ships, the fighting was brutal and terrifying. The aliens were bigger and stronger than humans, but they had never faced enemies who fought with such determination. Human Marines didn't retreat when wounded. They kept fighting until they physically couldn't continue. "They won't surrender," a Krillian soldier screamed into his communicator. "I shot one of them 3 times, and he still kept coming." The battle raged for 14 hours. The Krillians had expected to crush the human fleet in less than 2 hours, but instead they found themselves fighting for their lives. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept functioning with systems held together by determination and spare parts. Crews that should have surrendered after losing half their people kept fighting. Ambassador Velith watched the battle from the command center, his face pale with shock. On the screens, he could see Captain Moon's destroyer surrounded by 3 Krillian ships. The human vessel was clearly doomed. "She should retreat," Velith whispered. "She won't," General Kim replied, standing beside him with her arms crossed. "Watch." Captain Moon's ship was indeed surrounded and taking massive damage. But instead of trying to escape, she did something that made even the hardened general take notice. Moon ordered her ship to ram the largest Krillian battleship, while her remaining crew members activated every explosive device on board. The destroyer vanished in a ball of fire that took 4 enemy ships with it. Every human on that ship had volunteered for the mission, knowing they wouldn't survive. "She murdered her own crew," Velith gasped in horror. "She saved 3,000 civilians," General Kim corrected coldly. "Captain Moon and her crew chose to sacrifice themselves so that the families on Kepler Station could live. That's what we call a victory." As the battle continued, the Krillians began to panic. They had never fought an enemy that was willing to trade lives so freely. Human ships damaged beyond repair would ram enemy vessels rather than surrender. Human crews would continue fighting even when their ships were falling apart around them. "General, Trax, we need to retreat," one of his captains begged over the communicator. "These aren't normal enemies, they're not even trying to survive." But General Krax was too proud to retreat. He had conquered 17 worlds without a single defeat. He wouldn't be beaten by a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. That pride cost him his fleet. By the end of 14 hours, 37 Krillian ships had been destroyed or captured. The remaining 23 vessels fled, in panic, leaving behind recorded messages that would terrify Krillian commanders across the galaxy. "They're not warriors," one surviving captain reported. "They're demons. They don't fight for glory or conquest. They fight like the universe. Itself depends on winning. Command, please hear me. Do not engage the humans in battle. They don't fight like any species we've ever encountered." Commander Yu stood on his damaged bridge, looking at the tactical display. His fleet had been reduced to 8 functional ships, and hundreds of his people were dead. But Kepler Station was safe, and the galaxy had just learned something important about humanity. When humans went to war, they didn't just fight to win. They fought like the fate of civilization depended on victory. And maybe it did. Admiral Tay Seo hadn't slept properly in 3 days. The command center on Lunar Base never went quiet anymore. There were always reports coming in from battles across 12 different star systems. The massive display screens showed the current state of the war, and it was both encouraging and heartbreaking at the same time. In 6 months of fighting, human forces had pushed the Krillian Empire back further than any other species had managed in decades. 12 star systems that had been under Krillian control were now free, but the cost had been enormous. "Sir, casualty report from the Vega system," his aide reported, handing him a tablet. Admiral Seo looked at the numbers and felt his heart sink. 2,000 human soldiers dead, another 5,000 wounded, but they had saved a planet with 8 million civilians. "Send reinforcements to Colonel Park's unit," he ordered, "and make sure the medical ships get priority fuel allocation." What amazed him most wasn't the victories. It was how humans kept volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Every time they needed soldiers for a suicide run or a desperate defense, more people stepped forward than they could use. It was as if the entire human race had decided that dying for others was better than living safely while innocents suffered. On Proxima Colony, Lieutenant Yunji Nam was living proof of that attitude. Her battalion had been holding the same defensive position for 6 weeks, facing Krillian attacks that should have overwhelmed them days ago. The enemy outnumbered them 5-1, and they had heavier weapons and better armor. But the humans wouldn't give up. "Lieutenant, we've lost another defensive position on the North Ridge," Sergeant Wu reported. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he had a bandage wrapped around his left arm. "The Krillians are pushing hard. Maybe we should fall back to the secondary line." Lieutenant Nam looked at the tactical display. The sergeant was right. A tactical retreat would save lives and give them a better defensive position. It was the smart military move, but behind their current position were the evacuation ships, still loading civilian refugees who couldn't defend themselves. "Negative," she said firmly. "We hold this line." "Ma'am, we're taking heavy casualties," the sergeant pressed. "At this rate, we'll lose the entire battalion in 2 days." Nam looked out at the battlefield, where her soldiers were fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Many of them were barely adults, kids who had volunteered to fight in a war that wasn't even their own originally. They could have stayed on Earth safe and comfortable. Instead, they were here bleeding and dying for people they'd never met. "Sergeant, do you see those evacuation ships?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Those ships are carrying families, children who are scared and don't understand why bad people want to hurt them, parents who are trying to keep their kids safe, grandparents who have already lost their homes and everything they own." She turned to face him. "We don't retreat because there are families behind us. If we fall back, those families die." The sergeant nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't about military strategy or tactical advantages. This was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, no matter what it cost. Meanwhile, in the Krillian capital, their most famous military leader was having a very different conversation. General Gorthak the Destroyer had earned his name by conquering 43 worlds without a single defeat. He was known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate warrior, a being who lived for battle and had never met an enemy he couldn't crush. But the humans had him completely confused. "High Command, I must report a situation that I don't fully understand," he said during a secure communication with his leaders. "These humans are not fighting like any enemy we've faced before." "Explain," demanded the Supreme Leader. "Every other species fights for logical reasons. They want territory, resources, or power. When they start losing too many soldiers, they negotiate or retreat. It's simple mathematics. At some point, the cost becomes too high." Gorthak paused, trying to find the right words. "But humans don't seem to care about the cost. What do you mean?" "They fight for an idea. They truly believe that protecting innocent people is more important than their own lives. Yesterday, a single human ship with 30 crew members attacked my entire fleet to give civilian transports time to escape. They knew they would die, but they did it anyway." The general's voice was troubled. "How do you defeat an idea that's willing to die for itself?" Back on Earth, Counselor Nexus was struggling with the same question. The peaceful Altarian had been observing human military operations for months, trying to understand how this species could be so effective at warfare. He found Dr. Sora Jiang in her laboratory at 3 a.m., still working on new weapon designs. "Doctor, may I ask you something?" he said quietly. Dr. Jiang looked up from her work. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes showed that she, like everyone else involved in the war effort, was pushing herself to the limit. "Of course, Counselor. Why do you do this?" Nexus asked. "I've reviewed the casualty reports. Your species is losing hundreds of thousands of people. Your losses are staggering. Any reasonable species would have negotiated a peace treaty by now." Dr. Jiang set down her tools and looked at the alien with tired but determined eyes. "Because someone has to. I don't understand. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old wars on Earth," she said. "She would say that evil succeeds when good people do nothing. The Krillians have been conquering and enslaving peaceful species for decades. Everyone knew it was wrong, but no one was strong enough to stop them." She gestured to the weapon she was working on. "I don't enjoy making these things. I became a scientist to help people, to make life better. But right now, the best way I can help people is by making sure our soldiers have the tools they need to protect innocent civilians. But the cost, Nexus began. The cost of fighting is terrible, Dr. Jiang interrupted. But the cost of not fighting would be worse. If we don't stop the Krillians, who will protect those who can't protect themselves? The alien counselor stared at her for a long moment. Finally, he understood something that terrified him. Humans didn't just understand war as a tool or a necessity. They had made peace with the idea that sometimes violence was the only way to protect peace. They had accepted that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to stop evil people from doing worse things. As reports continued to flood in from across the war zone, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The humans weren't just fighting to win battles. They were fighting to prove that no species should have to live in fear of bullies and conquerors, and they were willing to pay any price to prove that point. The Battle of Titan's Edge lasted only 4 hours, but those 4 hours changed the galaxy forever. Emperor Krillux himself had come to lead what he thought would be the final battle against the humans. He brought with him the largest fleet in Krillian history, over 5,000 warships and 2 million of his best warriors. Admiral Jaiho Park met them with barely 800 human vessels. The odds should have been impossible, but Admiral Park had learned something important during the long months of war. The Krillians were excellent fighters, but they fought like every other military species in the galaxy. They had rules, traditions, and limits that they wouldn't cross. Humans had no such limitations when innocent lives were at stake. Emperor, the human fleet is moving into attack formation, reported General Vorthak, Krillox's military advisor. They appear to be charging directly at us. Krillox laughed. Foolish. They're outnumbered 6-1. This will be over quickly. But Admiral Park wasn't planning a conventional battle. As the human fleet approached, something unprecedented happened. Every single human ship began broadcasting on all frequencies, not military communications, but personal messages from the crews. This is Captain Lee Soo-jin of the destroyer Incheon's Pride. If I don't make it home, tell my daughter that Daddy loves her, and that we fought so her world would be safe. Sergeant Kim Hae-won here. Mom, if you're listening, thank you for teaching me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they're bigger than you. The messages continued from hundreds of ships, fathers saying goodbye to children, mothers leaving final words for their families, young soldiers talking about the homes they might never see again. Emperor Krillox watched in confusion as his fleet intercepted these transmissions. What are they doing? Why are they broadcasting their personal communications? I think, General Vorthak said slowly. They're saying goodbye. That's when the Emperor realized that every human ship was accelerating to maximum speed, aimed directly at his largest vessels. They weren't planning to fight a battle. They were planning to win a war, even if it cost them everything. They're all on suicide runs, screamed a Krillian captain. Every single ship. But that wasn't quite true. Admiral Park had calculated exactly how many ships he needed to sacrifice to cripple the Krillian fleet, and he had planned for the rest to survive. It was the kind of cold mathematical decision that only humans seemed capable of making, trading some lives to save many more. The battle was devastating. 300 human ships destroyed themselves, ramming Krillian vessels, taking down over 2,000 enemy ships in the process. The remaining human fleet then attacked the confused and demoralized Krillians with a fury that broke their spirits completely. Emperor Krillox watched his mighty empire crumble in 4 hours. When Admiral Park's ship appeared on his communication screen, the human looked tired but determined. Emperor, this is Admiral Park of the human fleet. You have 2 choices. Surrender unconditionally, or we continue fighting until there's nothing left of your empire. Choose now. Krillox looked around his bridge at his terrified officers. His military advisors, who had conquered dozens of worlds, were shaking with fear. He had never seen Krillian warriors look so defeated. We surrender, he said quietly. The war was over. Ambassador Velith couldn't believe what he was seeing. Within days of the Krillian surrender, the massive human war machine began taking itself apart. It happened with the same incredible efficiency that had built it in the first place. Weapons factories that had been producing missiles and energy cannons were quickly converted into medical facilities and food production centers. The workers who had been making instruments of war were now creating supplies to help the worlds that had been damaged by the fighting. Warships that had struck terror into Krillian hearts were being retrofitted as relief vessels. The same ships that had carried death across the galaxy were now loaded with medical supplies, food, and construction materials for rebuilding destroyed cities. Most amazing of all, the human soldiers were simply going home. Millions of people who had been trained as warriors were returning to their families, their jobs, and their peaceful lives. There were no victory parades or celebrations of conquest. They had done what needed to be done, and now they wanted to get back to normal life. General Hana Kim stood on the observation deck of the command station, watching the last military transports prepare to leave for Earth. Velith approached her. "Carefully. General, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Ambassador. How can your people just stop? You've built the most powerful military force in galactic history. You could rule everything. Why are you giving it up?" General Kim looked out at the stars for a long moment before answering. "The Krillians were never our real enemy, Ambassador. War was our real enemy. We just happened to be better at it than they were." "I don't understand. We didn't fight because we love violence. We fought because we hate it. We hate war so much that we're willing to be very, very good at it to make sure it ends quickly." She turned to face him. "The goal was never to conquer anyone. The goal was to make sure that peaceful species like yours can live without fear." "Captain." Minho Lee was preparing the final report for the Galactic Council. He sat in his office, writing the last official document of the war. "The Krillian Empire has surrendered unconditionally," he typed. "All Krillian military assets are being converted to humanitarian aid under human supervision. Former Krillian territories are being established as independent worlds with their own governments. We recommend immediate relief efforts to all worlds affected by the conflict." He paused, then added, "Human forces are withdrawing from all non-Earth territories. We have no interest in governing other worlds. Our job here is done." As the last human warships prepared to leave for home, Ambassador Velith finally understood. What had happened? The humans hadn't just defeated the Krillians. They had shown the entire galaxy what true strength looked like. It wasn't the strength to destroy everything in your path. It was the strength to choose when not to use your power. The strength to fight only when necessary, and to stop fighting the moment it was no longer needed. The humans had become monsters to fight monsters, then immediately returned to being guardians when the monsters were gone. The galaxy was safe, but its protectors were wolves who had chosen to be shepherds, and that choice, the ability to be incredibly dangerous but choosing to be peaceful instead, was the most terrifying and wonderful thing any species had ever witnessed. As the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, heading home to their families and their peaceful lives, every species in the galaxy understood a new truth. Earth's children were always watching, and they would always be ready to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The war was over, but the legend of humanity had just begun.